Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products.
Hello, and welcome to In the Frame, Exploring the DIA. Today we're going to look at what you might call a couple of hidden aspects of our operations. How we store our art, how we look after it, how we move it around the building, but also what we call deaccessioning, how we dispose of objects that we firmly believe no longer have a place in the collection, and what we do with the proceeds from the sales of these particular objects. Anytime you're walking through a great art museum like the DIA, you could be pretty certain that what you're seeing in the galleries is just a fraction of what the museum actually possesses, the proverbial tip of the iceberg. In the DIA's case, we have a little bit less than 6,000 works of art on view, which represents a tenth of our roughly 60,000 object collection. But it's important to stress that of our great works of art, our great paintings, sculptures, decorative arts objects, about 90% of those things are on view. And it's great to have works in the storage area so that when we lend out a great painting or a sculpture, as we do a couple of hundred times a year, that we have something that we can bring up into the galleries and replace the work of art that's gone, rather than having, in some cases of museums I've worked at, having to rehang the gallery to make up for the loss. But having said that, the other reason that we have so many works of art in storage is that they have physical conditions that we have to pay attention to. They are, generally speaking, light sensitive. Approximately 2/3 of our collection consists of objects that are works on paper, drawings, photographs, those kinds of things, or textiles, beautiful tapestries or moccasins or anything like that. And for every one of those objects that you see on view, if we want to maintain that particular presentation or installation, we need 4, 5, 6, 7 others in storage so that we can put them on view for a number of months and then take them on view so we protect their long-term existence and protect them from the ill effects of overexposure to light. And this is very much the case with many museums. The final category of objects in the collection that are in storage are objects that for one reason or another we don't really need anymore. And how we deal with that is something that I'll return to later in the program. But whatever the reason is for objects being in storage, they need to have the same care and attention that objects that we put on view have. The whole science of storage is very important. How objects are handled, how they're kept, the condition that they're kept in, the kind of surroundings that they have are all very important and require a great deal of professional attention. One of the things that we have to do, for example, is to know where everything is. And as part of many museums' auditing process every year, the staff are handed a list of 20 or 30 works of art that they have to then go and find and show to the examiners that we know exactly where this object is and that it's in perfect condition. Doing all this requires considerable professional expertise. And museums have individuals that are registrars and technicians who spend a great deal of their time making sure that everything is shipshape. Today we're going to meet Terry Burkett, the Director of Collections Management at the DIA. It's his job to do much of what I've been talking about.
One of the little-known facts about museums and storage is that it's very common for a museum of our size in particular to have very large collections and to only exhibit a portion of that collection. The collection that is in storage then needs to be organized and also to be accessible for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that in order to be responsible caretakers, we need to be able to organize and monitor the collection in order to make sure that the collection is stable and also accessible at all times. Accessibility of the collection is an important touchstone for collection care. Not only do we want the curator and other museum professionals to be able to work with the collection, but it's really the only way that we can ensure that the collection can be studied properly and that the information that is associated with the collection can come to life. We frequently have visitors that are working with our curatorial staff that access the collections, study objects that we don't necessarily put on view, but that have some kind of significance or relevance to other works that are on view. In general terms, objects that are in storage have requirements for their care that are not only based on national standards, but are also standards that the DIA has developed over the years. Some of these standards would include the temperature and humidity that we store objects at. We need a stable temperature, most objects around 70 degrees, and a stable humidity. Also, we tend to want to store objects of like materials together. You can imagine what would happen if a ceramic piece is stored next to a metal piece and something happens and the metal piece contacts the ceramic piece. So in order to maintain the safety of the collections, we also store things together with their own kind. The Collections Management Department is involved in both the organization and storage of the objects that we have in our collection and the installation of these objects in the galleries. We are intimately involved in working with the curators and conservators in achieving best practices both in storage and, as I said, in the way that we display the objects that the public gets to enjoy. We are 2 years into about a 7-year-long storage and deaccession project. The first phase is to work on organizing the collection so that we have better accessibility to it and we can research the collection. Curators will then make some decisions about which objects are most pertinent to our collection and have the most relevance. The Registrar working with the project is responsible for working with the curators and doing research on the collection, helping to organize reviews of the collection, and working with auction houses and other outside parties. Once we've developed some internal ideas about which collections we want to review and have done some review on them, we then bring in outside expertise to help us make judgments about the relevance of the collection and how well it fits into our collecting patterns. Overall then, what we hope to accomplish through this project over the next 7 years is to have a collection and storage that's organized, well researched, and also to have been able to focus the collection on what's really important to the DIA and our presentation of that collection. Careful handling of the objects and movement of the objects is an important part of museum technicians' job. They are required to understand the physics of the objects, the way that the objects are constructed, and also how to support the objects on carts and other conveyances. We fabricate custom storage boxes and other devices that will support an object in storage and also provide a safe environment for that object. We make handling devices for objects that will help to reduce the amount of handling that an object incurs. Objects are stored in a neat and orderly fashion. We employ certain organizational factors when laying out objects on a shelf. objects are safely stored on shelves, racks, painting screens, and other storage furniture. Shelves are padded and objects are marked in such a way that they can be found and utilized without actually having to move them. Our main goal in storage is to maintain a good environment for the objects that's both safe and provides accessibility for those who would like to research the collections.
I mentioned earlier that museums like the DIA have many objects in storage that we simply don't want anymore. They're the residue of a different kind of museum. The museum might have been, as was the case with the DIA for a short while, we were a history museum, and a science museum, and a natural history museum, and took in objects that really have no place in an art museum. To deal with this kind of thing, US museums, deaccession is the word that we use, a rather ungainly word that means we get rid of something. This is a very American approach, in fact. In Europe, deaccessioning is frowned upon. The theory in Europe is that objects enter a collection at a certain time, and it's part of the history of the collection, and that individuals at the current time have no right to rewrite a history. And we take a very different point of view. Here, we regard objects that have no meaning to the collection as something of a burden. After all, as I mentioned earlier, we have to take great care of these things. We give as much care to an egg cup in a way as we do to our great Bruegel. So keeping these things around can be expensive. And the practical American solution is that we deaccession them. We sell them, and we use those proceeds to improve the collection as it is today. But when we deaccession something, we have to do so very, very carefully. We have to take into consideration what the object might mean to the community, what the object might mean to individuals who gave the work of art in the first place. And so we proceed with great caution. We sort of undo everything that we did when we took the work of art into the collection. Sometimes museums can make mistakes. And there are a number of examples in the past of this and other institutions where something went out of the door that, looking back, we think that perhaps we should not have done. Then there are those examples that very definitely have no place in the art museum today, but has tremendous emotional resonance for part of our community. And such was the case when we decided to deaccession one of the flags that Custer took into battle with him at the Battle of the Little Bighorn, and that was found under the body of a trooper. The DIA bought the flag in 1895 for $54, which sounds almost funny today, but $54 back in the 1890s was worth probably something like $100,000 or so. It did so by subscription, and a trustee wrote a big check for $50. It came into the DIA, it was on view, but in 1928, when this building opened, the flag was not on view. For a couple of decades, it was on loan to the Custer Memorial National Park, and when a curator came here in 1982 and asked about it, we discovered that, in fact, for at least 10 years, it had been in storage at the National Park Service storage in Harper's Ferry. We brought the flag back here, we took great care of it, we've looked after it, but there came a point when we realized that the object being here was being unseen. Just a couple of specialists had seen, a few specialists had seen the flag over the previous decades. It had been out on loan a couple of times, but essentially it was imprisoned here. When we deaccession something, we have to sell it on the open market. We have to use those proceeds to buy more art for the collection. But to many people, this wasn't just an object that had found itself in the wrong place. This was a symbol of patriotism, of military sacrifice, and our announcement that we were going to be disposing of the flag according to our own professional standards didn't go down very well in certain quarters. And the flag sold at auction for $2.2 million. It was bought, as was expected, by a private collector. which may sound like a bad idea, but in fact, given the history of the relationship between private collectors and other museums, this in fact is a good thing, because there's a very, very high chance that within not too great a time, the collection will be put on loan at a museum or given to a museum, and the flag that the DIA had almost kept secretly for the best part of 80 years will now be released, will be on view to the public in an appropriate context. Another professional deeply concerned with the well-being of works of art in the collection is the registrar. The registrar keeps records of where the objects are, their coming and going, their movement around the buildings. They're the individuals that enable us to know exactly where everything is. And they work very, very closely with the technicians in taking care of this aspect of the collection. Now, deaccessioning is an ongoing process at most museums. The curators work with the other staff to sort of work along as they can, when other tasks permit. But here we've actually set up a task force that over a 7-year period is going through a systematic review of all of our collections, so that at the end of 7 years, we think, we will have in our collection only those objects that we know we really want in the collection, or as there is some compelling reason for keeping those objects. And taking care of the registrar's duties in this task force is our assistant registrar, Christina Gibbs.
So here at the museum, we have over 60,000 works of art in the collection. And in the registrar's office, we have a lot of duties to fulfill. We have to make sure all the objects are handled safely, and we also make sure that we document all the objects, so there's a file for every object. And this happens anytime an object comes into the building and also goes out of the building. So that includes objects that are coming in for acquisitions, for purchase consideration or gift consideration. Also, when works come in for exhibitions, they all get registered, and also loans. And then finally, we also catalog the whole deaccessioning process. So, after the curator has been in consultation with the director and they've agreed upon which objects should move forward with being considered for deaccessioning, it comes to the registrar's office. So the curator submits a form which includes the justification for why this object should be looked into for deaccessioning. And then the registrar begins a very long process, which is very detail-orientated, and we document every single step of the process. But the first step is to make sure that we actually own the object, which is called finding clear title. So we go through all of our records, including the object files. We go through any correspondence with donors. We looked into funds that were used to purchase works of art, and also go back to the old minutes from the meetings when the work actually came into the collection. So while we're doing this, we're also looking to make sure that the object does not have any restrictions to it, so that we are free and clear to dispose of the work of art. So to follow our procedures, we also collect lots of documentation and put it into the object files during this entire process. The curator also goes out and gets 2 different appraisals at least for the objects, and those go into the file. As well as, it's not required by law to write to the donors or heirs of the donors, but as a courtesy and ethically as a museum, we believe we do. So we also notify the donors or their family when an object has been up for deaccession. And all of this documentation creates a story in each object file for future generations. So after we've done all of that, we've gotten all the appraisals, all the values in, it's time to compile all the information about the object and send it off to the collections committee for final approval. And then after collections committee votes, then it goes on to the board of directors. So after the collections committee and the board of directors have both given their final seal of approval, the object is now considered deaccession. It is noted as such, and now it is time to move forward with the disposition of the artwork. There are a few different ways to do this, but most typically it is sold at public sale. Sometimes it will be exchanged with another museum or transferred to another museum who may have a better interest in that object. If we go with the first, we typically sell at public auction for transparency reasons. So after the method of disposition has been chosen, the object is ready to be packed and shipped. So we go out and make sure the object gets packed carefully. We take condition notes of the object, all kinds of notes before it moves, so we know the condition of the object. And then for say, it's going to an auction house at public auction, we determine which auction house it will go to and then decide to ship it there.
When we sell a work of art and use the funds to buy another work of art, we keep track of the source of the funds that we are using. So, for example, the name of a donor that appeared on the label of the work of art that was sold then is transferred to the label of the work of art that was acquired through the disposition of the original object. And you can tell that as you walk through a museum. If you look at the labels and see the words "by exchange," that indicates that this work, this one particular here, for example, was acquired using funds from works of art that were given by individuals, some of those individuals very important to the history of this museum. This particular beautiful object here, a 17th century bust of Ottaviano Acciaiuoli by Ercole Ferrata, was acquired for this museum with the help of funds that came from the sale of works of art that were given by Edsel Ford and Hawkins Ferry, two of the DIA's greatest supporters and patrons. Just like the Ferrata sculpture, this particular ewer that we acquired in 2000 was also acquired with the help of funds raised from deaccessioning. In fact, it's quite a long list, an impressive list of over a dozen individuals who were patrons of this institution. In this case, it was very expensive. It's one of the most expensive objects that I've been associated with, and we looked at all of our funds that could possibly apply, and in the end we were able to do this because of the fact that we had an ongoing deaccessioning program that had produced funds within the Department of European Painting and Sculpture that could be used to acquire this particular sculpture. And similarly, this exquisite rock crystal crucifix over here also required the use of funds from deaccessioning. And that brings me to one final important point about this whole process, is that the individuals whose names are transferred to the label as having helped contribute towards this particular acquisition, we know are individuals who would have approved of this kind of art. This kind of art is similar, it's like the objects that the individuals gave that were sold to help us make this kind of acquisition. It's the last step in what, as I said, is a very, very careful and cautious process so that we improve the collection at the same time as we remember and take care to acknowledge the individuals who helped towards this kind of acquisition.
I've been a member 18 years, and I decided to become a member when I retired 18 years ago. I was told to retire not from something, but to something, so I retired to the DIA. What I like about being a volunteer is the commitment and the camaraderie that I've received from meeting the volunteers, the staff, and the people here at the DIA. I've been coming to the DIA about 40 years. I was bringing my nieces and nephews to the museum on Saturdays for different activities besides visiting myself. My favorite parts of the museum are the Dutch galleries and the modern galleries. I'm particularly impressed with the German expressionists, and my favorite painting is of sunflowers by Neckel. The DIA is great for the city of Detroit, and it's great to the city of Detroit. My favorite part is the people that I volunteer with, the people that I've met here on staff and the volunteers. I'm here every Thursday as a volunteer, and it's just like something from heaven that I'm coming to.
I hope you've enjoyed this episode of In the Frame, and I invite you to come down and look at some of the indisputably great art that we have on our walls all the time. You might look out for some new acquisitions, and you might look at the label to see if it's buy exchange. For more information on the DIA, go to dia.org. Until next time, this is Graham Beale, your guide to one of America's great art museums, the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Support for In the Frame, Exploring the DIA is provided by Masco Corporation Foundation. Masco is a global manufacturer of home improvement and building products. An encore presentation of In the Frame is available on demand for viewing at DetroitPublicTV.org.